I'd like to introduce the next speaker, who most of you will know, Professor Elliot Sperling.
Maybe why don't I just use it here? Okay, is it working? You hear me? No. It's on now. Okay. This is really a very, very difficult task. Everybody's had a lot of fun, and they've learned that linear reports and papers are really passe, and everybody's enjoyed learning all of these things from David now, and I feel like the schoolmarm that has to call everybody in and tell them to sit in their seats and listen to a linear paper, which goes from page 1 to the end. And David, how did you do this to me? And he even had music to go with it. And so now I just have to bore you all with my paper on the Tangut Minyak element in the lineage of the Sikkim Chögyal. So please forgive me and sit in your seats and stop chewing gum and don't talk to your neighbors. Am I speaking too fast? Okay, I have a lot of time. Okay, I will slow down. Okay, the Minyak element in the lineage of the Sikkim Chögyal has been mentioned and described by several authors. Some ambiguity has attached itself to the specification of Minyak, since the term is used in Tibetan for both the historical Tangut state and one of the easternmost regions in Kham. In Western scholarship, the reference to the Minyak antecedents of the Chögyal in Tibetan literature were already signaled by Joseph Rock, and in a long quote from the then unpublished translation by Kazidawa Samdrup of the well-known Dendron Gera, referred not to the Tangut country or land, but to the Minyak province, implying its identity as part of a larger entity. And I sort of like quoting from Kazidawa Samdrup, since I'm going to be a schoolmarm, and I remember one of the things that the great Banyak Ating once told me was his experience as a child being in a school in which the schoolmaster was Kazidawa Samdrup, who did not hesitate to hit the students when they misbehaved. In any event, Rock quotes from Kazidawa Samdrup, and he says, and this is from the translation of the Dendron Gera, some people again ascribe the origin of the Chögyal to the Minyak Sehu Gyepo. The story in this case runs thus. In the northern portion of the Minyak province, there is a chain of mountains called Mintri Hills, said to be inhabited by a spirit called Sehu, a Nagadaitya, a serpent ogre of malignant character who, once assuming the form of 7 cavaliers, started northwards where they came across a woman who was a witch. The leader of the troop of cavaliers had sexual connection with this witch and begat a son, who came to be known as Sehu Gyepo, Sehu King, after his father. This king, in time, brought the empire of China under his subjugation. The 6th king of this line came to be called Gyege. The time which intervened between Sehu Gyepo and Gyege was 260 years. Now, this account, which is Kazidawa Samdrup's translation of a portion of the original, obscures a few elements of the Tibetan text that are worth pointing out with regard to the question of Minyak. The original actually reads, if I may, or in my translation, moreover, some assert the origin of the Chögyal is in the lineage of the Sehu king of Minyak. With regard to that, it is said that on a mountain called Mintri, between the Chang'e area of Minyak and the region of Ga, there was a malicious Naga demon who was called Sehua, and who emanated into 7 horsemen, and went to Chang'e. The commanding horseman thus came to have intercourse with a flesh-eating woman, and as a result, a son was born, and, bound to the father's name, was called King Sehu. During that period, he brought the realm of China under his rule. 6 generations later, there appeared the one called Gyege. The manner in which the predictions of King Sehu appeared in the 206... Well, that's not the music that I programmed, but it's enough. If you can do it, I can do it. The manner in which the prediction of King Sehu appeared in the 260 years between King Sehu and Gyege are explained in the Gerab Sewe Melon. Now, immediately, we may note that the actual text is specific about the connection between the Sikkim royal lineage and the Tanguts. The names which appear in the Dendron Gera are unambiguously linked in the Tibetan tradition with the greater Tangut land of Xia in Tibetan Ga. And this is in several sources. Whatever level of historicity one wishes to accord the account, there is no doubt that it does ascribe the origins of the Chogyal to the ruling clan of the Tangut state. Not only does Selu Gyalpo figure prominently in Tibetan accounts of the Tanguts, and in traditions carried from the Tangut state to eastern Tibet, Gyege is also well attested. Indeed, the Lorong Chenjung gives dates for his reign, 1212/1213 to 1226, which overlap with those of two Tangut rulers recorded in Chinese sources, Wei Ming Tunxiu and Wei Ming Dowang, who reigned respectively. Did it go off? Is it off?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well. Okay. This way I can I think I can speak more freely and more slowly too. In any event, I was saying that Gyege is his dates in the Lorong Chenjung overlap with those of two Tangut emperors, Wei Ming Zunxiu and Wei Ming Dowang. The first reigned from 1211 to 1223, the second from 1223 to 1226. Rather short, and that might explain why there is that overlap. In another piece which I wrote in Academia Orientalia Ungarica, I actually pointed out that the Lorong Chenjung is particularly, very interestingly, it's very good for the dates of the last of the Tangut emperors. They almost all agree with what we have in Chinese sources. This is very, very important. Another important source linking Sikkim to Minyak points more specifically to Kaminyak, and as a result necessitates closer scrutiny of the references to Gaminyak, that is Qixia, described in the passage just translated. This is the text translated and studied by Saul Mullard, who spoke when I was supposed to speak yesterday. And yes. The text is entitled Dencho Lane Bakte Nanzing Yagar Shacho Yune Ongte Kancho Minyak Aldung Pensum Ki Chungkung Logyo. And a version of this was made available to me by Tashi Tsering very generously in a pre-publication critical edition under the title Lasso Kujoe Gera. Within this version, there is no mention of the Tangut royal line descending from the Selu Gyalpo, but there are mentions of Minyak itself, or as Kaminyak. Indeed, we may point out that the Dendrung Yerap also contains further mentions of Minyak that do draw it somewhat away from a simple understanding of the term as equivalent to the Tangut state. So we read in the Dendrung Yerap that, quote, it is said that some descendants of the Indian Dharma Raja Indrabhuti came scattered to Minyak and reigned as the kings of Minyak. Indrabhuti is here connected to Minyak, and also, it follows, to the lineage of the Sikkim rulers. In general, though, there is a certain degree of frustration inherent in attempts to establish verifiable historical signposts for the account of the Minyak rulers in these sources about Sikkim. And here I'm talking not so much about the Sikkim part of all these histories, but the Minyak, the Tangut part of these histories. Now, at this point, there is another text worth bringing into the discussion, one entitled Minyak Aldung Ki Chungkung Logyusam Dendrong Yepo Dungrap Chungkung, a text that recounts the origin of the Sikkim ruling line up to the 17th century. And again, I express my deep gratitude to Tashi Tsering for providing me with a pre-publication glance at this text. It goes up to the 17th century, and in fact, the last lines of the text contain a reference to the establishment of the Qing dynasty and the first emperor of the Qing dynasty ascending the throne. This text opens with its own account of the migration from Minyak, quote, at the time when the king of Minyak's sway was very great, when Sakya Panchen was serving as the king's chaplain, the Lama was doing the practice of the tutelary deity called Guru Drakmar Yeshi Rapar. The deity himself appeared and as a treasure took out from a rock a seal having a Pemaraga lotus design with a 9-stingered scorpion, which he presented to the king. The lineage from that time on was one wherein, when the king's sway increased, at that time all of Kham and China were under his rule and dominion. And after a few reigns, in the prophecy of Guru Drakmar Yeshi Rapar, it was predicted that the field of conversion for one line of the kings of Minyak will be the hidden land in the southern part of Tibet, the land of snows, Demodrong, one of the 24 hidden lands of Guru Padmasambhava, and after 25 reigns, one from the Awa lineage of Kham Minyak went to Tibet. The references herein to the migration through Tibet and ultimately to Sikkim by the last of the 25 kings of Minyak. The references to the might and sway of these rulers and to the contemporaneity of Sakyapandita and the powerful ruler of Minyak, all these point to the Minyak in question being the Xixia state. But the actual facts alluded to in this passage are questionable and refutable. The patronage of Sakyapandita by the last of the Tangut rulers, his dynasty's sway over all of China, these cannot be reconciled with what we know historically about the Tangut state. The same account is largely repeated in the Dendron Gera. Now, it goes without saying that the Dendron Gera is a work of very late provenance. In fact, it's a very recent work, one might say. And I think this is the 100th anniversary of the, I think it's 1908.
1909, maybe.
Oh, 1908. So it's the 100th anniversary of the Dendron Gera, which we might commemorate here today. Nevertheless, to the extent that the Dendron Gera attempts to represent received knowledge, as it does with regard to this account, that knowledge is rather garbled as concerns the Tanguts, if indeed that is whom we're supposed to see in this passage. But this is a slightly more complex picture than might be imagined if the question is framed as one in which we must decide whether the tradition about the royal family's origins are either in Kam-Minyak or the Tangut state of Xixia. It's not simply an either-or question. The Dendron Gera also makes reference to a link between the Minyak kings and the Audun clan of Minyak. When it begins discussing the clan, the first reference to Minyak is to Kam-Minyak. This account also brings in one of the early figures in historical chronicles dealing with the movement into Sikkim, Yebum Sak. He's been discussed by several scholars, again most recently Saul Muller. Indeed, the Lasok Tujoe Gerap, the work that he translated, commonly uses the name Kam-Minyak in describing the migration into Sikkim and Sikkim's early history. At this point, we might ask whether it might be best to limit speculation about the origins of the Sikkim Chögyal, as recorded in the relevant text, to consideration of a migration from Kam, and assume that all references to Minyak are meant to indicate Kam-Minyak. This might be convenient, but we cannot simply dispose of a tradition that links the lineage to elements that are clearly part of Tibetan accounts of the Tangut state, the state of Ga-Minyak, the Xixia. Now, no? Okay. I hope you can follow me. I'm extremely jet lagged, and I think I'm doing well just by standing up here and not falling down. The proposition that refugee remnants of the Tangut population fled and wended their way through the southeastern margins of the Tibetan plateau is by no means new, and it is not really controversial, certainly not in China. Chinese and non-Chinese scholarship on the Tanguts generally accepts that there were Tanguts who survived the destruction of the Tangut state, and that modern colloquial descendants of the Tangut language are still to be heard in eastern Tibet. The question has been studied by several Chinese scholars, such as Wang Jingru, Li Fanwen, Deng Shaoqin, and others, some of whom took Stuart Wolfenden's notion, put forth in 1931, that the Tangut language was the ancestor of the Yerong language. Some of whom took note of that proposition. Wolfenden was wrong in the specifics, and the focus of much of the contemporary research has been, not surprisingly, the area of Kam-Minyak. But Wolfenden's observation that Tanguts had come into Kam and that a descendant of their language is spoken in the region is considered correct. Over several decades, a consensus coalesced around the now commonly accepted notion that the Tanguts are to be linked to the Dangxiang Qiang, a people recorded in traditional Chinese dynastic histories as present in the Sino-Tibetan border areas in the pre-Tang period. The Tanguts are more specifically tied to a branch of the Dangxiang mentioned in Tang sources under the ethnonym Miao. It is recorded in the Zhou Tangshu. This is one of the standard dynastic histories of the Tang. It is recorded in the Zhou Tangshu that after the Tibetans had routed the Dangxiang and occupied their lands, with some of the Dangxiang fleeing to China, the remaining Dangxiang were called Miao by their Tibetan rulers. That appellation is a transcription of the same name that appears in Tibetan as Minyak. So we basically have that name Minyak, which already is there well before the Tangut state is established. Dangxiang itself is generally linked by etymology actually to the name Tangut. The contrast with some of what our sources in Sikkim's early history state is clear. And at times, those working with those accounts tend to focus on Kaminyak as the point of origin for the migration that established Sikkim's monarchy. Researchers working from Chinese sources look upon Kaminyak as one of the important endpoints in the migration of Tongguts from the destroyed state of Xixia. In most Chinese studies of the post-Xixia Tonggut migration to the Tibetan borderlands, attention is naturally given to the area and people designated as Muya, understood to be the modern equivalent of Miao. And I don't want to confuse you too much. I use the term Miao, which is Minyak, and Muya, which is a modern derivation from that. It is understood that, again, just bear with me when I say Muya or Miao, and just think Minyak, okay? But it's important that I use these Chinese renderings because we're dealing with different questions in the research. It's understood that while a part of the Danxiang eventually came to form the core of the Tonggut state elite, other branches did remain in the Sino-Tibetan borderlands. While the Chinese differentiated between the Miao in the border and the later Xixiaran, the inhabitants of the Tonggut state, the Chinese differentiated. They had Miao were the ones who did not form the Tonggut state. They were the Danxiang on the border. And then they referred to those who had formed it as Xixiaran. They were not Miao. But in Tibetan, they were both Minyak. Okay, this is Minyak. Okay. Thus, when the Tonggut state collapsed, there was an influx of refugees from the state into the very areas that still housed the Miao, that is, who still housed the Minyak. The area of Kaminyak was not the only area into which refugees penetrated at the time of migration from the Tonggut state. Either during the time of their original flight, or in some cases following an original settlement in the Kaminyak area, these peoples could be found in other border regions, a fact that is attested by various Tibetan histories and the spread of the term Minyak as a clan name. However, we ought to be quite clear about what is meant here. While it is indeed the case that refugees from Xixia did migrate into areas on the Tibetan plateau, most obviously Kaminyak, the attribution of descent from the Tonggut emperors on the part of ruling lineages in Tibet can at present only be taken as that, attribution. One might say the same thing with regard to the appearance of lineages elsewhere, for instance in Cherney, which I've been looking at most recently, in which descent from the Tibetan imperial family is claimed. But to say this is not to negate the Tonggut link. Obviously, elements of Tonggut lore, Tonggut history, penetrated these regions, and this phenomenon cannot be separated from the migration of people from the Tonggut state. But the question of descent from the refugees, royal or otherwise, who fled the destroyed state is a bit more complex. The established presence of Miao, the Minyak, in the Kaminyak area made it a natural refuge for those coming from Xixia. We must emphasize again, however, that we are discussing two populations of Miao, or Minyak, that is, the ones who were there and did not form the state, and the ones who formed the state. I know, excuse me if I sound like I'm spoon-feeding this, but I realize how confusing Miao and the Muya and the Minyak can be. We must also understand that the refugees from the Tonggut state integrated themselves into the lands of those Miao, those Minyak, who had not been part of the state and who had not played an important or even a dominant role there. Nevertheless, the new refugees were a diaspora in spite of their affinities with the Miao or Minyak who had been dwelling in the area of Kaminyak for centuries. In the way that many diasporas play significant roles in generating wealth and economic growth, the refugees were important in the region. Their historical memory, their traditions and language integrated with those of the Miao already there, leaving a clear impression of Tonggut links. For in this period of dynamic growth and economic and political change, the very arrival of the refugees carried with it its own dynamism. And we can sort of see this in a number of other sources. When you look at the, for instance, the Chinese gazetteers, the traditional Qing dynasty gazetteers, which trace the history of the Dazendo, the Dajianlu gazetteers. Basically, it's only after the Mongol period that you really see anything happening in that area. This integration of the two populations makes somewhat moot the question of whether the further spread, well, maybe I should say this slowly. This is important. This integration of the two populations makes somewhat moot the question of whether the further spread of a Minyak lineage to Sikkim represented a lineage from the Xia state or Kam-Minyak. The link to the Xia state became the common historical memory of the Minyak population. That's why I wish I had some sort of visual display that I could do. Maybe you could make one up for me in which I could sort of really hit that point in. The integration of Xia memories and links in the resident Miao population of the Kam-Minyak area is one of the significant points implied in Chinese scholarship on the question. Many of the main lines of this scholarship were laid out by Deng Xiaoqin in an article published in 1945, wherein he adduced evidence for the flight of refugees from the Tangut state to the west, and more importantly, took up the question of a figure that he learned of from the local population while carrying out investigations in the Kam-Minyak region in 1944. The figure in question was called Xiwu Jiaobu. He had ruled over a portion of North China called Muya, in other words, Minyak. He came to the region, that is Kam, and brought with him the name Muya. Deng Xiaoqin easily identified Jiaobu as the Tibetan word for king, Yepo, and connected the Muya appellation with the name of the Xia state. However, he then proposed that the term Xiwu was a transcription of the Tibetan Seiwu, which it is, but then in turn, he said it was but a rendering into Tibetan of Xixia, which contradicts the consistent Tibetan rendering of Xia as God in different spellings. And this has been repeated. Li Fanwan has stated on the basis of Deng Xiaoqin's assertions that the name of the district of Dao, which is to the west of Datsendo, that Dao is similarly a transcription of Da Xia, the Great Xia, which is not a term that the Tanguts actually generally use. In fact, they just referred to, well, no, they used Da Xia. I'm sorry, Xixia was not a term that they used. They did use Da Xia, but it's very difficult to see that in Dao. The Xiwu Gyerpo that Deng Xiaoqin describes as a well-known figure in Kam-Minyak is, of course, as I said, Seiwu Gyerpo, an important ancestor of the Tanguts according to several Tibetan sources, and mentioned as well in the Dendron Gyerap. Indeed, his presence in the Dendron Gyerap is indicative of that work's place among Tibetan sources that mention the Tanguts. It is indicative of the fact that Tibetan traditions concerning the Tanguts, whatever else one may say about Kam-Minyak specifically, became part of the origins attributed to the Sikkimese rulers. Other elements from Tibetan accounts of the Tanguts appear as well. The translation of the Dendron Gyerap done by Kazi Dawa Samdrup, as I said, omits or misunderstands references to Ga and Chang'e. Chang'e, of course, is Liangzhou, one of the important Tangut cities. It has been proposed in an article by Lu Mei and Nie Hongyin that Seiwu Gyerpo ought to be identified with the founding emperor of the Xixia state, Li Jiqian. This is doubtful, though no less so than their suggestion that the Tibetan Gaizu should be taken as a transcription of Xiazu. They're looking at all of the different Tibetan transcriptions of names of Tangut rulers, and one of them, Gaizu, they said, well, this guy, maybe that should be Xia. Now, of course, Ga as Xia is well attested, but in terms of an imperial title, an imperial name, Gaizu sounds, frankly, just like an erroneous writing of Gaozu, which is a common temple name for Chinese emperors, reign title rather for Chinese emperors. The fact remains that the tradition of Seiwu Gyerpo remains strong in the area of Kam-Minyak. Li Fanwan recounts a legend about Seiwu Gyerpo, indicating the persistence of oral traditions about him. Deng Xiaoqin also did the same. A good proportion of Chinese research on the subject of Tangut migrations into Kam takes up the question of the Miao and the Danxiangqiang. But there is general agreement that the Tanguts who fled into Kam generally traveled first to areas in which there were Miao or Minyak peoples who had not been part of the Tangut state. An article by Dai Gang suggests that the peoples who are today designated Muya are ultimately the product of Tibetanization of the original Minyak people who were in Eastern Kam during the Tibetan imperial period. And they were Tibeticized. Following that, they had a period of intimate interaction with refugees from the Tangut state, which also had its effect on them. but these views are not shared in their entirety. An article by Shangguan Jianbi asserts that too much is made of the division between the Miyao or Muya on the basis of whether the Tibetan Empire ruled over them or not. In essence, he claims that they're largely the same people. Some migrated north and formed the Tangut state, others didn't. When the state collapsed, those who could returned from that region and simply went back to Eastern Kham in a very natural way. Though, as he said, elements of them are to be found in other areas, Kham and Amdo. He also notes that they came to constitute important clans, and in support of that statement, he makes reference to the Sikkim royal lineage. Another researcher, Huang Zhenhua, also notes the diverse places in which Tanguts established themselves following the destruction of the Tangut state, and the places in which claims of clan ties to Minyak appear, including the Sherpa regions of Nepal as well as Sikkim. However, as concerns Sikkim, Huang Zhenhua remarks that the historical sources are too few to allow for any judgment about the validity of such claims, though he does comment that given the prevalence of such claims elsewhere, they shouldn't be ignored. This leaves us in the end with an interesting phenomenon. The very prevalence of claims to descent from the Tangut rulers is found often enough in Tibet and the Himalayas that one cannot ignore the fact that the Tanguts and the Tangut state must have been a remarkable presence in the Tibetan world and subsequently in Tibetan memory. It must be stressed once more that this is said without regard for the historical validity of the various traditions drawing upon some sort of Tangut lineage for different rulers. We are well aware of the legitimating function of claims of descent from the Tibetan imperial family with regard to the various ruling lines that developed across the plateau in the centuries following the end of the Tibetan Empire. The claims of descent from the Tanguts were obviously of a similar, albeit lesser order, particularly in eastern Tibet. Although the Tangut state looms as a bit of arcane lore for most Tibetanists, its impact on the Tibetan and Himalayan world was greater than one might otherwise assume. And having said that, I'll just throw in this little anecdote, and having been, just slightly, but only slightly obsessed by the Tanguts for a little bit. I went in the spring to see a movie. It was a Russian, Kazakh, Japanese production called Mongol, and it's the first. Siskel and Ebert. Then. Well, it opens up. I think, and I forget the date, but I believe it's 1176, and the first screen opens up, and it says 1176. The Tangut state. That's the first movie I've ever seen that had anything to do with the Tangut state, and that's the very first. I knew this was going to be a good movie. And there's actually Tangut script. You see Temujin, Chinggis, in prison, and underneath him on the window is Tangut script, and so it can't be more authentic than that. Okay, with that, I'll end my remarks, and I hope some of it at least was intelligible, and I apologize if it was a little bit garbled, but then again, I'm reporting on a tradition that I consider to be garbled, so maybe that's the non-linear part of it.
Thank you, Elliot Strauss. Paddy.
Should I just
Paddy.
use my voice? Okay. Out of the mist, in the counties close to China, better known as Luding County and Kangding County, Chakzamka and Dartsando, these areas have been steadily assimilated, and Luding County has been largely assimilated. And what's happening is that local people are trying to change their nationality on their identity cards. That rather than calling themselves Tibetans, it's to their advantage to be something else. And so some of them have easily just said, I'm Han Chinese. But now there is a movement for them to call themselves Xixia. And so in both Luding County and a little bit in Kangding County, you have local people wanting to change their identity cards to call themselves Xixia. The Xixia are not an officially recognized minority in China, but they're pushing to do this.
I have enough troubles with some of the things I say that I'm considered politically insightful on Tibetan questions. I mean, and now I'm going to be inciting Tangut nationalism. That was an appropriately censored remark.
Take Ron Davidson and then Tashi Seri. Ron.
that the real ethnonym of the Tongan state was the Xia rather than Xixia, and that Xi was a prefix to that, the Western kind. We see in Sakyavit chronicles and particularly in Kalahunsta Drakpa Gyaltsen's material in the 12th century, the presence of a vast number of Tsami. And I have opined that this is a representation of that ethnonym. Shami as being rendered as Tsami, as in Tsami Lotsawa, the most famous of them all. And that would tend to problematize your statement that Xia is always being represented as, or Minyak is always being represented as Nga, or Ga. Yeah.
I've seen it used in a context, a clear context. Tsa. I mean, I know Tsami Lotsawa, but I've never seen that Tsa being used in a clear context, unambiguously referring to the name of the state. I've never seen that.
It's not as the name of the state, but these people are specifically identified as Minyakba.
Well, you know, there's Tsami Shingmi also that, you know, and Stein has talked about that actually with regard to this very population in the pre-Tonga population. So
I think at Drakpa Gyaltsen's time, it's fairly clear that he's referring to individuals from the Tongan state who are coming to Central Tibet, to Sakya, to study with him. And I believe that Tsami Lotsawa is identified specifically with the Tongan state as well.
yeah, no, I agree that there is an identification of Tsami with this Tongan state, but I don't think that that represents a transcription of the ethnonym. It could be a lineage, it could be a further reference of this association of Tsami with the Minyak on the borders earlier. But in other words, I don't dispute that it's that it can be a reference, you know, to the Tongans. You know, I mean, as a variation of ethnonyms. What I don't think is that it is Xia. I constantly see. I don't know. You know, I'm not a linguist. You know, I don't claim to be a linguist, historical or otherwise. But I've simply not seen a transcription into Tibetan as anything other than Ga. You know, where you know, it's quite clear this is the name of the state. And I see, you know, I often see Gaminyak, which is a reference to the Tonga state. But no, the Tsami are connected to it. But and in fact, linguistically, I don't see how you could make the transition from Xia to Tsa, because it really was a Ga. I mean, what we see now is the old French transcription was with an H, Hia, and it was not this sibling.
Okay, thank you. We'll move.
Existence of Kham Minyak there in 1865, which is not available to us up to now. And then in the spelling of Kham Minyak, not the Kham Minyak, in Kham Minyak, it is spelled both Menyak and Minyak with Denbo and Gigo. Again, with the reference to the Sioux, even in Kham Minyak is largely divided into pastoral and agricultural land, and also in the Romba area we have Sioux Romba. So in Kham Minyak also there is a place or a tribe or a claim for the Sioux. I would like to share that.
I always learn something new from you.
Okay, we'll come across to you, Francois.
When it's a
As Tashila said that yes, in Manyak, in the Rome area, still there is a place called Siurong. And of course we have a monastery also named Siurong Monastery, which forms part of the one of the 13 branches monastery, Sariku Monastery. On that, of course, on the 4th, I'll be showing you some of the slides. So, of course, there are still some of the very old houses which they claim about 900 to 1,000 years old, which UNESCO is interested. Of course, there is no historical evidence that this has something to do with Sivu-Jabu or not, but there are. So just I want you to know that to strengthen is that Sivu-Rong is there, because Manyak normally divided into upper and lower Manyak, and the lower Manyak supposed to have 9 rongs which are facing to the river Nyakchu. So this one is the Siurong. So that of course we will I mean, later on I will just, we will discuss on that in a few slides. Thank you very much for giving an elaborate account on Minyak, which, you know, I myself was born in Minyak, but we are not so much aware of it, except that the collection which the St. Petersburg Museum had, that Pangbut Shisha. So I don't know whether that, where the famous is the two-head image of Buddha. So whether that is a Karmanyak or it is Pangbut, so I don't know. Do you have any information on that?
On the collections. That's the Tangut materials from the Tangut state.
Okay, yeah, Pangbut is.
But I want to thank you for your remarks. You know, I was limited into what I was going to put into the paper, but Li Fan Wan actually in the late 70s, early 80s did an expedition, if I can use that term, into the area on the borderlands, which he wrote up, and it was one of the sources that I used when I was referring to Li Fan Wan. And he, of course, he talks about the Sewurong, and he talks about a number of places. I was simply just trying to cover the question of Tangut element in the Sikkim Trivia, but there is an awful lot of stuff to be done with that. As for the buildings there, I believe those are some of the buildings that who is it? I think she's trying to work on those buildings.
UNESCO,
No, on
yes.
the tower.
Yeah, on the tower.
On the
Okay.
tower,
But
yes.
Rinpoche's, as the old house, which claims to be the origin.
Oh yeah, and in
It's
fact,
not the tower.
yeah, no, but the original house is Sewun Gyabo.
May not be, but they claim it.
Yeah, that's also covered by Li Fan Wan, and I think he even gives, if I remember correctly, I don't have the article with me, but he even gives a plan of it. They actually did some excavations there. But thank you very much, and if I may, can I ask, what are you going to claim as your nationality now? You're talking about,
I would say that as Tibetan, by birth, Bhutanese by citizenship.
Thank you, Laura. We have time for one more quick question.
You did refer to the name.
Yes.
Where does he, how does he originate and where does he go?
Oh, that the lineage, the lineage, he did not go to Mina, but the lineage descends from Imravoti. This is just one account.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Elliot Sperling, Bloomington. Thank you.